Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Buddhist Path of Awakening course. Let's start by bowing in. Are you recording, Barry? Great. Okay. So tonight we're starting our course on death and the Bardos. Bardo literally means intermediate or thank you. Intermediate state or state between. Bardo etymologically means from to, bardo, and it refers to the fact that in the Buddhist teachings, the realm of existence, which is what we inhabit, is divided into 6 bardos. There is the bardo of birth, of this life, actually, which begins at the moment that we're conceived, and it ends at the moment that we contract the condition that's going to end our life. And during the bardo of this life, there are 2 subsidiary bardos, the bardo of meditation. This is our experience of meditation during that period, and the bardo of dreams. We're going to be mostly concerned with the other 3 bardos, the bardos of death. The first is the bardo of dying, and this begins at the moment that we contract the condition that's going to end our lives, and it continues until we end our lives. Now, normally, in the normal teachings, people consider that your life is ended when your heart stops, your breathing stops, when there are no more physical life indications that a doctor or a physician some sort can detect. But in Buddhism, it goes beyond that. When those physical indications have stopped, there is still the mental function, which continues. And there are 3 aspects to it. There is the aspect of, you might call it knowledge, which resides in the brain. The knowledge of the aspect of desire, which resides in the chakra 3 finger breadths below the navel. And the one in the brain is white, and the one in the navel is red. And these aspects contain thoughts, all the different mental actions. They contain 2/3 of them, because there's a third, which is the aspect of ignorance, which resides in the heart. And the aspect of aggression, of all those thoughts connected with that, moves down from the brain to the heart. The aspect of desire moves up from the chakra below the navel up to the heart, red, white and red, and they meet in the heart with black, which is the aspect of indifference. And all these represent all the different types of mental activities that exist in the brain. And when they all meet in the heart, they stop. And that, from a Buddhist perspective, is the true moment of death. And that, at that point, the person can either achieve complete enlightenment, or they can move on into the next of the death bardos, which is the bardo of dharmata, of reality. And we're going to be talking about that, not tonight. But, and then beyond that, into the bardo of becoming. The bardo of dharmata is where an individual who has trained enough, and most of us have not, but if we have, we can actually see reality. And that's described. And we'll go into that at another time. If we haven't trained enough, we just blip right through it, just like a blink of an eye, and you don't even notice it. And you move into the bardo of becoming, which is what most people understand by the term death bardo. It's traditionally said to last 49 days, although those 49 days are figurative because actually it's beyond days. There are no days, it's a purely mental state. And in this state, we move towards actual rebirth in a new body of one kind or another into this world. And there are 6 possibilities, the 6 realms, and actually more, but those are the main ones. We could be born as a human being, or a hell being, or a god, or all these things. So we'll be going through that later in the course. Tonight, we're going through the introductory chapters, a couple of them. We're working with 2 books. The first is Francesca Fremantle's Luminous Emptiness, and I'll be talking about the chapter in that, the preface, and tonight. And the second book is Dzogchen Pomlop Rinpoche's Mind Beyond Death, and Michael will be talking about the introductory chapter in that tonight.
Oh,
wow. We've got somebody who needs to be muted, I think. So, Francesca starts in her preface, which is relatively short, and she talks about Trungpa Rinpoche being the true inspiration for her book. Francesca was a Sanskritist and a scholar in England, and she met Trungpa Rinpoche and was totally impressed and became his student. He introduced her to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which was the main teaching. Now also, let's talk a little bit about the Tibetan Book of the Dead. This is the title for what is considered the main teaching in Tibetan Buddhism on death, although there are quite a few other teachings as well. The real title of this book is called the Bardo Tödo, which means the great liberation in the Bardo. The Bardo, the space between death and rebirth. And that's the true title of it. But what happened was that when it was first translated in the late 19th century by an Englishman named Evans Wentz, his last name was hyphenated, Evans Wentz, he sought to make it more popular than it might otherwise be, and he borrowed the title, the Book of the Dead, because another translator had translated the Egyptian teachings on death and had titled them the Book of the Dead, and they had become immensely popular, that book. And so he borrowed that title for the Tibetan Book of the Dead, hoping that it would make it much more popular than it might otherwise be if it was just simply called the Bardo Tödo, or achieving liberation in the space between the interval, the Bardo. And he was right. It did make it much more popular than calling it the Book of the Dead. So that's how it got its title. Trungpa Rinpoche introduced Francesca to this book. This is a long time ago. This is probably in the late 1960s when she met him in England. And she says that he is the source of whatever understanding she has. This book is her offering to him. And in fact, when this book was finally published, she and I had become friends. She had moved to the United States at one point and then gone back to England. But she was here for a number of years as Trungpa Rinpoche's student. And when the book was published, I wrote to her congratulating her. And she wrote back, and these were her words. She said, "Maybe he'll be proud of me now." She's so utterly devoted to him. So she points out that he was probably born in, she says, 1940. I always figured 39. You understand that in Tibet they didn't have any birth records like they do here, so it's kind of a guess. He liked to say that he was a certain age, and if he had been that age, he would have been born in 1939 or 40. And she gives an explanation of his name. Chogyam is his refuge name. Che is an abbreviation of Chökyi Gyatso. Chökyi Gyamso. Chökyi means Che is Dharma, Ki is a possessive particle, Gyamso means ocean of, so his name meant ocean of Dharma. It's a name you get when you take refuge. Trungpa was the name of his tulkus. He was the 11th Trungpa tulku. And the tulkus are like the Dalai Lama as a tulku, are enlightened beings, or who are enlightened at their core, and who achieve or are reborn continuously for the benefit of all sentient beings like us, and go through the path and achieve enlightenment as a demonstration of how it's done and how that it can be done. out of compassion, and they teach. That's what a tulku is. Tulku literally, and that's the Tibetan and the Sanskrit, it's Nirmanakaya, which means the emanation body of the Buddha. There are three bodies of the Buddha. The Nirmanakaya, or tulku, the Sambhogakaya, which is the communication body, it's also called the enjoyment body of the Buddha. And that's called the Sambhogakaya in Sanskrit, and I'm blanking it in Tibetan, sorry. And then finally there is the Dharmakaya, the body of truth, the ultimate body, which is the Chuni Kaya, the Chuni Dhatu in Sanskrit. So Trungpa Rinpoche was a tulku, he was a reincarnate lama. He was the 11th in his line, and she met him and was incredibly drawn to him in every way, and became his student and came to this country. She was a very fine scholar, and she became a Sanskritist. She hadn't been one, but she became one, as well as a Tibetan language scholar. Now, Trungpa Rinpoche combined the Kagyu and the Nyingma sects. There are four main sects of Tibetan Buddhism. The Gelugpa, which is the Dalai Lama's sect, the Sakya, which is a sect that we don't hear too much about. These two sects tend more towards scholarship and scholarly pursuits, although they all involve meditation. And then there are the Kagyu and the Nyingma, which are much more practice-oriented. Kagyu literally means the lineage of the word, and Nyingma means the old ones. And the reason that that's called that, when Buddhism first went to Tibet, traditionally, nobody knows exactly when it went. Tibet was prehistoric. It had no language, a written language, excuse me. So there is no written record of those years. There are some traditions that say that Buddhism went to Tibet in the 300s. More normally, it's said to have gone to Tibet in the 7th century, 600s, under a king named Songtsen Gampo. Is that right? I think so. And he sent one of his ministers, a man named Tonmi Sambutta, to India to bring back an alphabet, which he did. He brought back the Sanskrit alphabet, and it was adapted to Tibetan language and became the written language of Tibet, much the way we have adapted the Roman alphabet to write English, Italian, Spanish, German. They adapted the Sanskrit alphabet to write Tibetan. And so beginning in about the 7th century, Tibet had a written language, but it didn't really catch hold until the 8th century, when there was a king named Trisong Detsen. And these kings tend to marry multiple wives. In Tibet, they practiced both polyandry, which means one man, many wives, and, one wife, polyandry. They practice polyandry, which means one woman, many husbands, and polygamy, which means one man, many wives, simultaneously. Sometimes a man could have many wives, and some of those wives would have other husbands as well. So in the 8th century, a famous king named Trisong Detsen, I've sent this person a message saying that they have to come back at another time. And Trisong Detsen had wives who were Buddhist. He had a Chinese wife and some others, and they got him interested in, and he became a Buddhist. And he sent to India for teachers. And a man who named Shantarakshita came from India and spread and taught Buddhism, but he taught Mahayana Buddhism. And the story goes, this is a typical Tibetan story, that Shantarakshita, of course, he wanted to build the first temples and maybe even a monastery or a nunnery. And he organized the people that he had converted into a workforce to build these structures. But what they built by day was torn down by night by the adherents of the native religion, the religion that was native to Tibet, called Bun, as well as by the spirits that partook of that religion, the demons and so forth, and they couldn't get anywhere. So King Trisong Detsen said to Shantarakshita, look, he said, we need somebody with more mojo, as it were, than you. And Shantarakshita suggested that Trisong Detsen send to India for a teacher that he'd heard of who had magical powers named Padmasambhava, also known as Padmakara. They both mean the same thing, roughly, which means born or sprung from a lotus. The story goes that Padmasambhava was born at the fully formed at the age of 6 or 7 on a lotus in the middle of a lake in what is now, the lake was called Danakosha, in what is now considered to be Afghanistan. And there he was, fully formed. So he was a very magical person, and he lived in India at the time, and he was sent for, and he agreed to come, and he did. And he came and established Buddhism in Tibet. He conquered the resistance from the Bun religion and its adherents, and established Buddhism very powerfully. And in fact, Tibetans often regard him as the second Buddha, equal in power and strength to Shakyamuni Buddha, who had lived in the 7th to 6th century BC. Padmasambhava lived in the 8th century AD, roughly around 750 in Tibet. Meanwhile, Tibet had already spread, starting around the 3rd or 4th century BC. It started spreading to Southeast Asia and Ceylon, and then around shortly before the time of Christ, it spread from India across the border into China, where it eventually became Mahayana Buddhism. It had a difficult transition because of the difference between the languages. Indian, Sanskrit, and Hindi are highly etymologically refined, high, intense grammar, whereas Chinese has almost no grammar. And so there was a big divide in the language, and it took about 300 or 400 years for the Chinese to figure out what the Indians were saying. And finally, Buddhism was established in China, and from there it spread to Japan, Korea, and also Mongolia. Meanwhile, in the 7th century, it moved from India to Tibet and took firm root there. By the time it moved to Tibet, it had developed in India to a very advanced state, much more advanced than what went to China, much less Southeast Asia. What went to Southeast Asia, which was a much earlier, more primitive form of Buddhism. Likewise, what went to China around the time of Christ, Mahayana Buddhism. Tantrism had been developing in India, in the forests, and who knows where, nobody knows. But eventually it came out and was developed and took root in the great monasteries like Nalanda, Vikramashila, Nalanda Bodhi. And by the 12th century, it had taken firm root, Tantrism, in these. And when the Muslims invaded India in the 12th century and drove Buddhism out of India because it was an easy target, Hinduism was not an easy target, but because Hinduism was throughout the villages, all the local people were Hindus. But Buddhism was concentrated in great monasteries and universities. And so it was an easy target, and the Muslims in the 12th century, when they invaded and took over India, drove Buddhism out. But already it had spread to Tibet, and it took with it all the forms of Buddhism that had developed in India, including Tantrism. So Buddhism in Tibet was the most complete download of what had developed in India, more so than what went to China, much less Japan, Mongolia, and Korea, which basically got Mahayana Buddhism, the Buddhism of the Bodhisattva. Tibet got all of it, Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. So this is the background for the Bardos and the death teachings. Francesca was in England, and Trungpa Rinpoche had migrated to England. He had come out of Tibet because of the Chinese invasion of Tibet, And he had gotten a fellowship from, trying to think of her name, it'll come to me later. It was an Englishwoman who had given him money so that he could leave India, which he did, and go to England and become a student at Oxford, which he did. At the same time, he founded a monastery, actually a center in Scotland, which they named, he and his guru brother Akong Tulku, named Samyeling, after the great first monastery center started by Padmasambhava in Tibet in the 8th century. They named it Samyeling. Trungpa Rinpoche and Akong founded this. Eventually, Trungpa Rinpoche disrobed to the shock and consternation of all his students. He felt it was necessary that he had been hiding behind these robes and he needed to come out. And so he took off his robes, and he also had fallen in love with an Englishwoman named Diana Pybus, and they married. And they decided to move at the invitation of some of Rinpoche's American students there in Scotland. There were American students at that monastery at Samyeling, and they invited him to come to the United States and teach, and he did this. So he combined in his being both the Kagyu and the Nyingma teachings. This is because he was born Kagyu, that was his true lineage, but his main root guru, Jamgon Kongtrul of Shechen, was Nyingma. And so Trungpa Rinpoche received the Nyingma teachings through him. Now, there's a big division in Tibet between the Nyingma teachings, as they're called, so-called. Nyingma means old ones. They trace their roots back to the 8th century with Padmasambhava, old. Nying means old. Ma means ones or doctrine, both. Nyingmapa is a person who's a Nyingma, an old one. And at the same time, the Kagyus, what happened, I'm sorry, the Nyingma developed in Tibet in the 8th century, but in the 1000s, I think it was then, an evil ruler came to Tibet named Lung Dharma, who suppressed Buddhism for about 100 years. Eventually, he was assassinated, and Buddhism came out of hiding and reestablished itself, starting in about the 12th century. And in the 12th century, it was the Kagyus, and then following that were the Sakyas, and then in the 14th century, the Gelugpa sect, these three sects. So these sects are called the Sarma sects, which means new, as opposed to the old sect, which is Nyingma, which means the old ones. And Trungpa Rinpoche combined both. He also brought, there's a long tradition, and this is an important part of these teachings. There are two main paths for the teachings. One is called the path of the word, the Kama teachings, and the other is the path of the hidden treasures, the Terma. Terma means hidden treasures. The story goes that Padmasambhava in particular had teachings which he knew were inappropriate for the people of his time, that they couldn't understand them, and so he hid them in various ways, knowing that they would be rediscovered hundreds of years hence, and even by whom. And there are two kinds of terma. One is called earth terma, sater. Ter means hidden treasure, sa means earth. Sater are actually physical objects, could be almost anything. Could be a text, could also be just a statue, could be a rock, and they can be hidden anywhere, in a stream, in the rafters of a house, inside solid rock, whatever. But when the Terton finds it and discovers it and touches it, the teachings flow into that individual, and they need to write them down. Gomter is the other kind of hidden treasure. And the Gomter means mind treasure, Gom, meditation. And these come like radio transmissions to the Terton, the treasure revealer. And the Terton has to write them down as well. Trungpa Rinpoche was a Terton. He received both Gomter and satir, mind treasures and earth treasures. We didn't know this because in the United States, he only really told us about the treasures he received here, and all that he received here were gomter, mind treasures. And these were primarily the Shambhala teachings. Later, we learned from Tibetans who came here that he was a famous Terton in Tibet and had discovered many earth treasures, satir. And in fact, there are Tibetan teachers who bring these to us today. So, let's see here. It's about. She says, Francesca says that when she met Trungpa Rinpoche in the spring of 1969, while she was engaged and having difficulty with her PhD thesis, which she was writing on the Guhya Samaja Tantra, it's a Buddhist Tantra, at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, she felt an immediate attraction to Tantra as a spiritual path that relied on direct experience rather than belief and gave genuine respect and equality to women. This is true. And she quotes Blake, William Blake, one of my favorite poets of all times. He says, "For everything that lives is holy." And she felt that that's what Tantra was saying. There's a famous English scholar named David Snellgrove, and he persuaded her to use the Guhya Samaja Tantra for her dissertation. And so she learned Tibetan in addition to Sanskrit and became immersed in the world of the Vajrayana. She visited Trungpa Rinpoche at Samye Ling, and he gave her insight into Tantra. More than that, they established a very powerful connection. When he moved to the United States with his wife, she followed him in 1971. And here he gave 3 seminars on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. One formed the basis for his commentary to their translation. Francesca and Trungpa Rinpoche eventually did a translation together of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And the other 2 were published, these seminars were published in a book called Transcending Madness, which you can purchase, published by Shambhala. She said his talks were both terrifying and wonderful, a glimpse into a totally new way of looking at life. And she's particularly grateful to Trungpa Rinpoche for helping her to understand the practices and terminology of Dzogchen, the great perfection. Now you remember that I said that there were these 4 sects. The Kagyu's ultimate teachings were called Mahamudra, great symbol. The Nyingma sect's ultimate teachings are called Dzogchen, great perfection. And they really meet. They're very similar at the end. But they have different paths and they have differences. She was grateful to him for his insights into Dzogchen and his insights into his yogic experience, she said. She had many questions, as will you, and as do I, about the deities that appear in the second of the death bardos, the bardo of reality. In Sanskrit, it's called the bardo of Dharmata. In Tibetan, it's called the Cheni bardo. And the 6 realms, which are described there, as well as all of the wrathful and peaceful deities. There's one on the wall behind me there. That's the wrathful aspect of Padmasambhava. And there's one over here, which you can't see, Yamantaka, and so forth. There are many. The 108 peaceful and wrathful deities that are described in this bardo, this experience, which most people miss because they haven't had enough experience, enough in awakening. And they just blip through it the way we blip through any kind of experience of enlightenment, straight into the bardo of becoming, and when we have died and are in the process of being reborn. She says questions about the deities of the bardo of Dharmata and about the 6 realms, the hell realm, hungry ghost realm, the animal realm, the human realm, the realm of the jealous gods, and the god realm. These all inspired her to write this book. She needed to explain the basic concepts of Buddhism as well. And so her book really begins with an understanding of the basic concepts of Buddhism in the light of the death teachings. That's what it starts with. Then the second half of the book is more focused on the death teachings. Although in a certain sense all of Trungpa Rinpoche's teaching was imbued with the flavor of Dzogchen, she writes, he did not go into many of its technical details at that time, and I did not possess enough knowledge to ask him the necessary questions while they were working together. CTR, Trungpa Rinpoche preferred, and this is another note here, he preferred Sanskrit to Tibetan for certain things, like the names of the deities, and also for mantras. So you'll notice that we pronounce, those of you doing the Vajrasattva mantra, we say it in Sanskrit, Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manopalaya Vajrasattva Tsvena Patishta, and so forth, instead of in Tibetan, Om Vajrasattva Samaya Manopalaya. And it was because of his preference for Sanskrit when it came to the names of deities and to mantra. Trungpa Rinpoche felt the overuse of capital letters in Buddhism, everything was capitalized, was related to an underlying theistic attitude. Everything has to be holy. And so he wanted to put across the idea that enlightenment is no big deal, it's our natural state. So Francesca did decide to use capital letters in certain situations, but she did not use them in many. And you'll see this. And also, she didn't use diacritics of Sanskrit words, and she gives the Tibetan with a proper approximate phonetic transliterations with the full spellings in brackets and in the endnotes. And we could talk about that at another time. There are many ways of transliterating Tibetan, but she's basically using sort of common sense phonetic transliterations of Tibetan. She recommends the use of ordinary everyday language for translation, which he does, following the example of the Buddha and his successors, except when it comes to the study of technical philosophy and logic, where technical terminology is appropriate, though this only applies to a small area and especially not to tantric literature. Terms such as emptiness and compassion can be understood on many levels. It's for the reader to imbue them with meaning according to the context and in light of his or her own experience. Above all, translation is an art, and this is very true. She's at the end, she says she apologizes for her deficiencies. She did a terrific job, and expresses gratitude and opportunity to produce this book. She says, it has given me great joy in the writing. May it bring joy and benefit to all who read it. And with that, I'll turn this over to Michael.
Thank you, John. I actually wanted to share just one thing from Francesca's foreword to Luminous Emptiness. She begins by talking about Trungpa Rinpoche as being the inspiration and introduction to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but also says it's he who is the source of whatever understanding I may have of it. And then later she talks about her first meeting with him at Samye Ling. As he walked into the room and prostrated 3 times in front of the shrine, his movements were filled with a grace, dignity, and awareness that were overwhelmingly impressive. He radiated a sense of stillness and presence that I had never seen in anyone else. During my visit, not only did he give me help and inspiration to continue with my research, but somehow, without actually saying very much, he transmitted an insight into the real spiritual meaning of Tantra. Again, without saying very much, he transmitted an insight into the real spiritual meaning of Tantra. So what she's describing there is the kind of resonance, the kind of similar vibration, or whatever you want to call it, that we could pick up from a teacher. And it's out of this that we have some understanding of what's being presented that goes beyond just the words, or in this case, an insight that without actually saying very much. This is what we've talked about in the past as a blessing of the Guru, that somehow being in the presence of a realized teacher awakened something in us and that there's a resonance with that gives us some insight into some clarity. And this is why, once we come to understand this, why, when we feel compassion toward all sentient beings, we want to attain Buddhahood, so that we as well could be able to awaken something in people that would be of benefit to them. So I thought that was a really touching part of the introduction. I also really appreciated her comments on translation. I've studied with other people who are deeply into translation, and it's always interesting what they have to do in terms of moving from Tibetan or Sanskrit to English, and to pick words that really convey the meaning. I remember one person talking about how the direct translation of the Tibetan term would be something like thoughtless. But thoughtless has a very negative connotation in English, so you end up saying something else like thought-free or absence of thought to convey that same idea, so that sometimes a literal word-for-word translation doesn't work, doesn't convey the real meaning of the teachings. In the same way, some translators will use self-awareness, which can be confusing to English speakers because we might think of that as something like self-consciousness or something else. But what it's really talking about is right in the moment, direct experience of knowing what we're experiencing. It's not self-awareness in the sense of how we come across, although it can lead to that. It is self-awareness that leads to that. But it's a very immediate sense of being aware of what we're actually experiencing, knowing what we're actually experiencing. It's a real mindfulness. So in any case, I actually wanted to talk about Mind Beyond Death, the book by Pumlop Rinpoche. And there are two forewords that we read, as well as Pumlop Rinpoche's writing itself, called Gambling with the Lord of Death. And actually, I want to start by talking about that because I think it will be easier to understand, in particular, Khenpo Tseltrim Gyatso Rinpoche's introduction, if we understand what Pumlop Rinpoche has presented to us. So I apologize for going forward, going into that and then going backward to the forwards. Follow my logic there. So with Mind Beyond Death, we read a piece by Pumlop Rinpoche, again titled Gambling with the Lord of Death. And he begins by talking about a retelling of a story first heard by students of Padmasambhava, and that Padmasambhava is one who achieved the greatest accomplishment of all, the realization of the stainless and indestructible nature of his own mind that instantly dispels all illusions, even the fearful illusion of death. And this is actually it's this mind that actually is what's being expressed in the view that Khenpo Tseltrim Gyatso expresses in his foreword. So we will come back to that. But he goes on to say that this story is actually our story, that it's the story of our bodies and minds, and that we don't know this because we rarely face death. And when we do, we tend to impulsively turn away. We live in a culture that's fairly death-phobic and tends to, for the most part, try to hide the reality of death from us. Hearing people who, when I've attended seminars on death and dying in the past, they talk about how in our society we tend to sequester people in nursing homes, which are kind of like reservations for the dying, that we rarely come face to face with death and dying. And then when we do, it's beautified, prettied up. And so that we don't really deal with the reality. But as Pumlop Rinpoche says, running away will not ultimately help us. That reality will catch up with us in the end. And at that point, if we haven't prepared, if we haven't made some provision for death, if we haven't in some way faced the reality of death and dying, as he says, there'll be no time on death's bed to learn how to handle the situation. No time to develop the wisdom and compassion that could guide us skillfully through death's terrain. We'll have to confront whatever we encounter as best we can. And as he says, that's a genuine gamble. And he says, why would we take such a risk, especially if we know that there's an alternative? And the point is that now we have a chance to prepare. Otherwise, he says, and this is the analogy that is, that it forms the title to this chapter. Otherwise, we're like an innocent youth going into a gambling den at night with a lot of money. And he says, what's the likely outcome? So we don't wish to gamble with the Lord of Death, but whether we prepare or not, whether we prepare for death or not, we will meet, as he says, we will meet the Lord of Death. This is just like what we say in the the Four Reminders teachings. Death comes without warning. This body will be a corpse. Someday I will die. In all of time, everybody, we will all face death at some point, sooner or later. And it doesn't emphasize, but it is emphasized in the Four Reminders, we don't know when. So the point is, we need to take some sort of step forward now, here and now. And he says, who is this Lord of Death? The Lord of Death is the personification of impermanence and karma, or cause and effect. And in the Buddhist tradition, it's said that he's invincible except for a true holder of wisdom, which brings us back to the beginning, back to Padmasambhava, who realized the true nature of mind. So he says that many wisdom traditions have addressed the question of how the experience of dying can be made into a meaningful and powerful point at which to connect with one's deeper or higher nature. But again, in general, we tend to avoid death altogether. He quotes Woody Allen, I don't mind dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens. But that's not possible, as we know. He says we've created a negative and fearful cultural image of death. And for that reason, we draw away. We believe that death is the end of everything we hold most dear. Yet, our fear prevents us from knowing our own story, which is ultimately a tale of renewal and liberation. According to Buddhism, the reality, and this is where we begin to really look at what's happening moment to moment in our lives. According to Buddhism, the reality is that death and birth take place continually. The point is to learn that dying is part of the process of living. It takes place in every moment, not just at the end of life. And he says, to go beyond our abstract notions of death, we have to look deeply into our own minds and hearts. And he asked us, what does death mean to each of us individually? He asked that we ask ourselves, what does death mean to me personally? What does death mean to me? What does it mean to you personally? From our own experience of life, what is your most basic visceral feeling about death? How we define death largely determines how we will experience our own death. So I just have to think about that for a moment. What do we think about death? What do we anticipate? What hopes, what fears do we have about death and dying? For some people, it's great anger. For some people, it's great fear. For some people, it's a loss of everything that they've collected, accumulated, built up in life. For some people, the fear is more around loss of relationship. For some people, the fear is more of what efforts are left undone. And then there's hopes, that you might experience something higher, better, less obstruction, some kind of peace. But the reality is we don't really know. We just have ideas, different ideas shaped by our culture and by our personal experience. But again, how we define death will largely determine how we actually meet death when we experience our own. So it's something we should really contemplate. He then goes on to say, to die well, we must live well. He's beginning at this point to give us some instruction, to give us a taste of what we're going to be working with in this text. To die well, we must live well. And he asked another question. Could it be that because we don't know how to live fully or live well, we are afraid to die? To transform our fear of death and overcome it, we must come into contact with death instead of denying it. We must connect with death through genuine reflection. He says we must contemplate its image with a calm and clear mind, not just with the image our thoughts have created on the basis of superstition and rumor. So at this point, the next part would be a little bit more contemplative. If we could ask people to just take a good meditation posture, if we could just sit for a few minutes and just do exactly what he says, which is to allow ourselves to experience a calm and clear mind and begin to let go of whatever thoughts we might have. So we could take a good posture, primarily a straight back, a comfortable posture so that we can settle into stillness of body. And just feel our breathing. Allow ourselves to slow down, let go. And just simply become present. Become present with our breathing. And just gently observe thoughts, feelings, perceptions come and go. Just simple being, simple seeing. Just nowness. And just simply turn our attention inward. See our minds. Just as it is, just as we are. And if we're able to settle, let go of our thoughts and just simply be with our experience, we'll see exactly what he talks about in this text. He says that the way to meet death fully is to die every day, actually die every moment, to everything, that our thoughts, our emotions, our agony, our relationships, even our joy, that everything is in constant flux, constant change. Thoughts come and go, feelings come and go, moment to moment, constant change. And if we look at it, then we can see that, just as he says, from the Buddhist perspective, death does not mean just coming to an end. It also means coming into a beginning. That death is a process of change. Ending itself, he says, is neither positive or negative. It's just reality. When a moment of a lifetime ends, we can't argue with it. We let go. What we call life is simply an illusion of continuity, a succession of moments, just as we experience in meditation. One moment, another moment, another moment. One moment we're caught up in thoughts, the next moment we let go. One moment we're seeing, hearing, another moment we're feeling. Constant change, constant change. So a succession of moments, a stream of, as he says, a stream of thoughts, emotions, memories, which we feel is our possession. This is where we begin to project onto this experience, that we own it, that this is us in some way. And therefore, we spring into existence as the possessor of that continuity. But when we really look, we discover that that continuity is illusion-like. It's not continuous or substantial reality. And this is not easy to see. Trungpa Rinpoche, in Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, called it the continuity of discontinuity. That what we feel as a continuity is in fact a conceptual imputation, something we put onto our experience. That, for instance, we could say that I crossed if I drove east from here, I crossed the Connecticut River, and then I came back across the Connecticut River, or whatever river you might have near where you live. And we say it's the same thing, but in fact it's not. That the river is actually in constant flow, constant change, that it is not the same from moment to moment. And that what gives it an apparent continuity is the labeling. And over enough time, rivers change course, dry up, expand, flood, so that they're not the same thing from moment to moment. And in the same way, what we call our life is not the same thing from moment to moment. That the feeling of continuity, of a continuous self, is a projection. It's an imputation. It's a conceptual labeling that we go through. That in fact, as he says, it's not continuous or a substantial reality. That in fact, this continuity consists of, this is again Poma Rinpoche, it consists of single moments which arise, dissolve, and rise again. And we see this in meditation. We just don't fully understand the implication of it or the reality of it. Like waves on an ocean, it arise, dissolve, and rise again. That it does not continue from one moment to the next. The eye of one moment dissolves and is gone. The eye that's seeing becomes the eye that's hearing. The eye that's angry becomes the eye that relaxes. The eye, just my own words here, just to say what I'm trying to explain what he means here. The eye of the next moment always arises fresh. And that's really the idea of meditation. It's just what we say in the chant. The essence of realization is that whatever arises is fresh. And when we're able to rest without altering that, we begin to see that moment to moment experience is fresh, although it's different. It can't be said to be the same or different, yet conceptual mind, and again, this comes back to conceptual labeling. Conceptual mind identifies this ongoing flow of change as a single continuous self. And this is where we create the illusion of a reality of ego. I remember hearing one teaching where the teacher asked, in terms of understanding the sense of continuity and how it can't be said to be the same and it can't be said to be different, ask people, are you the same or different now than you were when you were 8 years old? And think about it. Obviously, we're very different. We have different bodies, we have different thoughts, we have different feelings. And yet we can't say that can't say it's the same, but we can't say it's different either. No one else has the memories that we have. No one else has the experiences that we've had. So it becomes insubstantial in the sense of any kind of definite, solid, real reality that we can point to. So again, it can't be said to be the same or different, this ongoing flow, succession of moment to moment, fresh experience. Yet conceptually, when we get caught in conceptual mind, conceptual labeling, we do take them as a single continuous self. So when we look at it in this way, we can see clearly, as Pamapa Rinpoche says, the process of death, the dissolving of fleeting thoughts, fading emotions from moment to moment. But when we experience the end of a moment, we also experience the process of birth. A new world, as he says, a new world is born as fresh thoughts and colorful emotions arise in response to shifting perceptions. And so he says, dreading death, because we get caught up in fear, because of our, whatever habitual thoughts we have about death. Dreading death, we do not see the obvious. That which has the power to renew itself is eternal, while that which is truly continuous has no creative power. It says it's stagnant, like an art house film. It just films one thing without changing angle or anything else. And he says it's really only by dying moment to moment that we can be truly in contact with life. That if we, again, it's the clinging, the attachment of ego, where we do rest in some kind of stagnant being. We do stay just simply lost in thought, lost in our dreams, and that is stagnation. That there is no openness in that. And so this is what he means when he said, could it be that we fear death because we're not fully alive? And that if we become fully alive, then we realize there's this ongoing, unending, unceasing process of change. Again, it's only by dying every day, letting go, being free. Only by dying every day that we can be truly in contact with life. He says, when our illusion of continuity comes to an end, however briefly, for instance, in moments of meditation, where we're able to just simply let go, we have an opportunity to glimpse the deeper reality that underlies it. This is and he says, this is the true and abiding nature of the mind, which is inseparable from the mind and realization of Padmasambhava, which is, again, how we began this chapter, by talking about his recognition of the indestructible true nature of mind. It is the primordial awareness, the luminous wisdom from which all phenomena arise, unknowable in the ordinary sense because it's beyond concept and beyond time. So this is what, when we're able to let go, when we're able to relax, when we're able to move beyond habitual thinking, habitual reactivity, habitual conceptual covering over of the world, that this is what becomes apparent to us. This primordial awareness, this luminous wisdom, what Francesca Fremantle calls luminous emptiness, from which all phenomena arise. And he says if we connect with that experience, past and future are transcended. Because there's really only the present. And in fact, all there ever really is the present. It's only in our dreams and thoughts that we project into past and future. But all there ever really is that we can experience is the present. If we connect with that experience, past and future are transcended, and we naturally wake up to a vast and brilliant world, luminous emptiness. When we know every ending is also renewal, we relax and become open to the process of change. We feel we can touch reality and are no longer afraid of death. And he says, at this point, from the Buddhist point of view, we have a choice. We can direct our story of living and dying now, or to wait, closing our eyes to the message of impermanence until death opens them. And he says, since we value happy endings, why gamble with the Lord of Death? What we want to do is wake up now. And that's really what the Tibetan Book of the Dead is about, is waking up now. And what it presents is, in fact, even in death, even in dying, even in the afterlife, after-death experience, afterlife, same thing, that there's always an opportunity to wake up. And it comes down to, just recognition, recognizing the opportunity. It's also said that the best preparation that we can make is our meditation practice here and now. So, since, again, we have a choice to direct our story of living and dying now, or to wait, closing our eyes to the message of impermanence until death opens them. So he then closes by saying that it's his hope that the book will bring clarity and insight from the perspective of Vajrayana Buddhism, which is where these teachings primarily arise from. And he says, may the profound wisdom and genuine compassion embodied in these teachings swiftly dispel all illusions of beings and relieve them of their greatest fears. And may the true nature of mind, the Buddha within, guide us all on the path of living and dying as well. So with that, I'll take just a moment to go back and reorganize myself. This is what happens if paper's in too many places. There we go. So I think now I do want to go back to the forwards by Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso and Zenkar Rinpoche, because I think that they'll make especially Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso's Rinpoche's presentation might make a little bit more sense now. It's very short, it's just a verse. There is nothing in between, so the Bardo does not exist. A verse is the title of his foreword. Birth and death have no existence. So in between these two is unborn, free from fabrication. Self and other have no essence. So in between these two is merely the unborn, free from fabrication. So what he's saying here is that from the point of view of mind, and even from the point of view of body, but particularly from the point of view of mind, that there is no real birth and no real death, because there's no real self to experience that it's an illusion. That what we, from the point of view of relative truth, conventional reality we call birth, is the birth of a physical body. But that body is continuously changing. It's changing when we're children, it can change into adolescence, into adulthood, into old age, that there's no one thing that we can permanently hold on to in terms of body. And that the mind is even, in a sense, even more ungraspable. What we come to realize in meditation practice is that each moment of mind has a preceding moment of mind. In fact, if you were to really get into the philosophical schools that look at what makes a moment of consciousness possible, one of the things is the ending, the dissolving of the previous state of mind. And so we go from moment to moment to moment. And if we really look at that, what it means to even say the ending of the previous moment of consciousness, the previous moment of awareness, we can't even really pin that down. But just for the moment. Otherwise, we would just be stuck with whatever we're perceiving, thinking, feeling right in the moment. If that this is again goes back to Punlap Rinpoche's point about stagnation. But in fact, our minds are constantly changing. And so what makes the next moment of consciousness possible is the cessation of the previous moment. And we can see that each moment of mind has then an arising. So as it was said to me in one class, we see that very clearly in meditation, that there's a constant process of cessation and arising and cessation in terms of moments of mind. And it would be so to feel that there isn't some kind of continuity of mind that goes beyond the life of the body would be to say, well, there's one moment of mind that just comes, that has no previous moment, which is birth. And there's another moment of mind that has no succeeding moment, which is death. And that is contrary to our experience of mind, that in fact mind is always moment after moment of arising and cessation. And we know that mind doesn't actually begin with the physical birth of the body. So the more we look, the more we realize we can't really pin it down. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. Obviously the Bardo teachings involve the notion of death and rebirth, previous lives and future lives, which we've read about in other texts as well. But when we really look at the moment-to-moment nature of mind, you kind of realize that how could there be one moment these two moments that are separate from all the nature of all the other moments of mind, where there's this ongoing process of arising and cessation and arising again. So we can't really pin down birth or death, particularly in relation of mind. So they have no true existence because there's no one to die to begin with in terms of a real ego. There's just this ongoing process of change. And so in between these two is unborn because there's no ego, no self that truly exists, free from fabrication. This is again ultimate view of emptiness. That any kind of pigeonholing, pinpointedness of a self is just what we've talked about before. It's a conceptual label. It's projecting something onto a continua. It's a generality, conceptual generality. And if we really look at that, we realize that mind is free from arising and cessation ultimately. Anyway, and that if a beginning and an end don't exist, then there can't be a middle either. So birth and death have no existence. So in between, there's unborn, free from fabrication. So it's really asking us to just let go. Self and other have no essence. There's no solid, ongoing, permanent self that we can point to. So in between these two is merely the unborn, free from elaboration. So it's really a very ultimate view, but it really relates directly to what Punlop Rinpoche was talking about looking at our the moment-to-moment nature of our experience and seeing that dying and rebirth happen all the time, that it's not just something that, I mean, obviously the birth and death of physical body is much more momentous, as we'll see, and also provides opportunities that we don't necessarily have during the bardo of this life. But in essence, it's the same thing, that there's no one thing we can hold on to or point to as having any real existence. Zenkar Rinpoche's forward is a little more, certainly much more graspable. He talks basically about some of the things that John talked about as well in presenting the Francesca Fremantle's book. Some of the history of the Bardo teachings, and in particular, he begins by talking about the Bardo experience that really draws our attention. The Bardo of dying and Dharmata and becoming, the moments between the end of this life and the beginning of our next life. And talks about how the appearances of life fade away, and then for 49 days we experience the awesome and terrifying visions of the disembodied state. But his real point is that in this book, in Punlop Rinpoche's book, Mind Beyond Death, that he's taken into his compassionate care beings like myself, Zenkar Rinpoche says, certainly beings like myself, Michael, people with bad karma who steadfastly cling to the confused appearances of this life, who are slaves to the 8 worldly concerns, which we've talked about many times, all of the gain and loss, pleasure and pain, fame and infamy, praise and blame, all the things that drive us from an ego point of view in this world, who are slaves to the 8 worldly concerns and turn into corpses of ignorant sleep at night, who waste our lives with misdeeds and meaningless prattle. Rinpoche's words light the way for us, offering guidance in this life, the next life, and the bardo in between, which, as we know from Khenpo Tsultrim Gyaltsen, ultimately don't exist in any kind of real graspable way. And he says just a little bit about each of the bardos, that in the bardo of birth, that we could reverse our attachment to appearances and extract, as he says, this is Zenkar Rinpoche's words, the most meaningful essence of our precious human existence. And he talks about, in this regard, developing a calm and stable mind through shamatha practice, which is so important in the beginning, because otherwise we're so distracted and so confused, and we're so caught up in our thoughts and our hopes and fears that we aren't really paying attention to what's really going on. And that's really, again, what Punlop Rinpoche was telling us. When we really look at the seeming continuity of our lives, we realize that it's constantly changing, that what's important to us in the morning isn't even important to us by the evening. Or if we even think back to a day ago, let alone if we think back 5, 10, or more years, how really ephemeral our memory is, how really dreamlike our experience is. And, in shamatha practice, when we really slow down, we can really see that very clearly. So reverse attachment to the appearances of this life and extract the most meaningful essence of our precious human existence, which is just what we talked about with the 4 reminders, that it's in this life, and in this time right here and now that we have the opportunity to do something about our experience in this world. He talks about the Bardo of dreams. In this book, he talks about the Bardo of dreams and the possibility of developing lucid dreaming, waking up to dreamlike nature of our experience in dreams, as well as the luminosity yoga during deep sleep, just understanding the luminous nature of mind in all our experience, including, as he says, even when we seemingly turn into corpses of ignorant sleep at night. The Bardo of meditation, which he actually connects more with the Vipassana experience, according to Mahamudra and Dzogchen. The nature of the Vipassana experience is the direct recognition of the nature of mind. So with mindfulness, we're present, but with Vipassana, we actually recognize what we're experiencing. And in Mahamudra and Dzogchen, that's the true nature of mind, which is exactly what Pomlop Rinpoche says in the beginning of Gambling with the Lord of Death, what Padmasambhava realized. And that's ultimately what overcomes death, because we realize that there's nothing that can really die in terms of mind. Physical body, yes, but mind, no. Bardo of dying, where he talks about the transference of consciousness, which we talked about a little bit last week, and also the Bardo of dharmata and Bardo of becoming. And in both these times, Zenkar Rinpoche says that Pomlop Rinpoche encourages us at this time to cultivate an awareness of the unreal, illusion-like nature of the visions that we experience. That by gaining confidence in all appearances being the mind's own display, it's possible for us in the Bardo of true reality to attain Sambhogakaya freedom. And this is actually something that we could experience in meditation practice now, realizing that all phenomena, everything we experience is of the nature of mind. He says in regard to the Bardo of becoming, which is the last Bardo before rebirth occurs, that if we fail to recognize our true nature in the previous Bardos, that there's an increase in fear and confused experiences. But even here, we could wake up and have, that there are potentially positive outcomes that could occur, that we could awaken into the naturally pure realms of the Nirmanakaya, that we could be reborn in a pure realm where its conditions are especially favorable for meditation practice and realization, or we could even gain a favorable rebirth in this mundane world that we live in. But the point is that throughout all the Bardo teachings, the main point is that we could wake up at any time. That if we're able to recognize our experience, wake up to the nature of mind, wake up to reality, that this can occur at any point. Then Zenkar Rinpoche goes into some analogies for, again, what this book could mean to us, what we could experience through this text, Mind Beyond Death. He says that it takes those whose eyes of intelligence are dull by the hand. He says that it could be like a cartographer or a map maker who corrects the wrong turns that we might take. That is like a steadfast captain skillfully delivering us from the Bardo's terrors. He says these teachings that will be presented by Pomlop Rinpoche are like a master key to a mine of treasures, that it places in our hands a miraculous gift of the teaching. And he wishes that it's a benefit to us all. He says, not only does this book contain all the key and profound instructions of the 8 great practice lineages of Tibet, it also expounds with freshness and intimacy the heart intention of all the accomplished masters of India. So these are a very profound set of teachings, and although it's about death and dying, it's also, as Pomlop Rinpoche says, really about how to live, how to be present, how to be awake here and now, and that in so doing, we're able to relate to death and dying with intelligence, compassion, and awareness. And this will greatly affect what our experience actually is. So, I think that's all I had, all that I wanted to say. John and I talked about doing a little bit of back and forth, so maybe he wants to say something about Plummer Rinpoche's text as well.
I just want to say a couple of words about, to inform you, Alex Zenkar Rinpoche. I came to Boulder some years ago, and I met him in at lunch, where there was a lunch with a group of students, a group of teachers, and he was highly, highly revered. Alex Zenkar is regarded as a brilliant, immensely learned scholar, which doesn't really come across in this writing, but you should know that he's regarded by other Tibetan lamas with great regard. I also just wanted to mention during these teachings that Michael was describing, I remembered my father. It's a very personal story. He died when he was 80 years old. He knew his death was coming for about 4 or 5 years. He had a form of cancer of the blood called multiple myeloma. And he had been told that he would die. I'm 80, same age as he was when he died. And I was in the house when he died. I wasn't there with him. By chance, I just wasn't there. But it was described to me that he was lying in bed and that his last words were, "I never thought it would be like this." I've never forgotten that. And I think these teachings, perhaps, are they a corrective for that condition for us? Or at least they bring it forward, that concern. So that's all I have to say at the moment. You can remove the spotlight. You can just have a group conversation. I want to say one more thing. These teachings are so profound, and there are many among us who will be dying soon, who have reached that age. There's more than one person in this room who is 80 or older. Who knows? It's getting to be that time of life. And so the magic and the fear and the meaningfulness of these teachings is really profound, I feel, and relevant. And even those who are younger, there will be some who will die young. You just never know. That's all I have to say. Mark.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm more afraid of disability than death. Being an insurance agent in the past, that was one of our sales pitches for disability. But it is to me, the fear of not being able to do things, the walks I take and such. I mean, we adapt. I wonder what it was like for Thich Nhat Hanh after he had his stroke. Um, they really, I don't know if anybody knew what he was going through for those years after his stroke. And I don't even know why I bring it up. It's true. You know what? I'm on some level, I'm comfortable with death, but then on another level, I'm like, yeah, but to not be able for my life to change so much. So I'm a big hypocrite. So I love my body, and I love to move around, and I take a lot for granted. I like my shitty car that's 13 years old, and and that's gonna die soon. I don't know which first. We're both looking at each other. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Ed Babantonio.
Yes, if you've ever had bronchitis or pneumonia, if you've ever been in the emergency room where you realize you don't you're so taken by the condition that you can't really comprehend being out of the condition. So I kind of look at death that might occur naturally. I'm not talking about a violent death that might occur naturally as a condition that you don't emerge from. So I think bronchitis is a great example. Great example. It's a terrible example. But if you've had that, there's nothing. There's just nothing other than being there and breathing, and you don't know how long it's going to go, and you actually don't care. That so I mean that might be one step or one experience before death.
Anybody have near-death experiences? I mean, I've had some moments that may have, not like you might think. Well, I had a seizure when it was like the coldest day of the year several years ago, and I was working, and I was in the snow, and I collapsed, and then I woke up while I was walking in the snow, and there were other things, where I almost crashed on the road. I hit black ice on the I-80, I think, and just you're just lucky not to crash into a semi in the middle of the country. But everybody I think has had something happen to them that could have killed them, and I don't know. That's kind of because like it hadn't killed me. I don't feel too concerned about it. Like it could have happened then, or maybe in another universe it did. There's a lot of theories about the multiverse. So I may have died infinitely. In fact, again, we do every moment. I believe that. We only live in the moment. I truly, absolutely believe that. We live and die in every little second, mini second. And then we move on until one day we don't. And then we get turned into stuff that makes everything else. So that's okay. That's not so bad.
I have a question, actually. Maybe I should put my camera on. Oops. Sorry, I clicked something.
I think we need to save this for tomorrow.
Yes, please come to the question group tomorrow.
Sorry.
Well, I can't ask a question?
No.
Well,
tomorrow, discussion group. But
You come
everybody,
tomorrow.
it's 7 o'clock and we're scheduled to close down.
Sorry, I bogarted the mic.
Well, just as everything else comes to an end, we must come to an end. So it's actually quite appropriate. So we'll close by dedicating the merit generated by our. We'll close by dedicating the merit generated through our study and practice to the benefit of all sentient beings. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
John.
That is a righteous gong, Michael.
It's right near the microphone.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, well, just as Puma Rinpoche said, every end is also followed by a rebirth or renewal. So we have discussion group tomorrow night. Please do bring your questions then.
Woohoo!
And comments and thoughts.
Yes, great. Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
Ken.
Thanks.
Be well.
Be well.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good. So let me know if you have a problem with the recording, John. I have a backup if you need it.